Coming to you with special guest Nikola Tesla. What? Oh, he's dead? Oh, excuse me. With our special guest, Tim Swartz. It's Littlepodcast of Horrors.
Hello. So, welcome to another episode of Littlepodcast of Horrors. This is James, Christina, and Chris, as usual, with our special guest, Tim Swartz.
Hi, guys.
Yeah, welcome to the show, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for having me on today.
So this is part 3 of our exploration of Tesla and his secret journals. And after the last 2 episodes where we talked a lot about Tim's book, we've got Tim himself for episode 3 to wrap it up. So to give our listeners a quick introduction to who Tim is, quite the bio you've got going. He's like the heck of a resume. So Tim R. Swartz is an Emmy award-winning television producer and videographer and author. Just to name a few of many of Tim's books, we've got The Lost Journals of Nikola Tesla, which we've been talking about, America's Strange and Supernatural History, Time Travel, Fact Not Fiction, and if I'm pronouncing this right, Jeff the Talking Mongoose, or is that Geff?
Nope, it's Jeff.
Awesome. And Tim's also a contributing writer for various other books, including Real Monsters, Gruesome Critters, and Beast from the Dark Side, and Real Ghosts, Restless Spirits, and Haunted Places. Tim's also a photojournalist. Tim's traveled extensively and investigated paranormal phenomenon and other mysteries, from the Great Pyramid in Egypt to the Great Wall in China. He's worked with major television networks, not least of which being the History Channel, which we'll have a question about in a bit. And Tim's articles have been published in magazines such as Mysteries, Fate, Strange, Atlantis Rising, UFO Universe, Flying Saucer Review, Renaissance, and also Unsolved UFO Reports. And Tim co-hosts the Paracast with Gene Steinberg. And how do you ever have any free time?
Really?
Yes, that's quite a resume.
Yeah, thank you. Well, and you're absolutely right. I mean, on top of everything else that I'm doing, I also have to, maintain the household. I'm married. I've got a 17-year-old daughter and various cats and dogs. So it's like, work for a few minutes, then get up and handle some kind of crisis, then get back and, work some more, and then, get up and clean up the cat puke or whatever. And that's, and that's a typical day for me. Yeah.
I feel that. Well, to kick this off, the first thing I wanted to ask you is, so your library of work, just your books alone, spans a wide range of just everything bizarre, which is like why you're completely down our alley, because that's what we do too. We try to explore everything. So what drew you into the world of the weird, the paranormal, and bizarre, and how did you manage to successfully turn it into a profession?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, isn't it? It happened for me way back when I was a kid, about in 3rd grade. And you probably have a lot of guesses on, oh yeah, I was interested in this stuff when I was a little kid. Well, it was just the opposite for me. I liked some science fiction, and like science fiction and horror movies, still do love all of that. Was interested in science, especially astronomy and space travel. When I was a kid, that was the beginning of the whole Gemini and Apollo space program. So that was fascinating. But I really didn't know that much about, say, like ghosts and UFOs and related subjects until in 3rd grade. in elementary school, we used to get a weekly newspaper that came out from the Scholastic book club.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and now I can't remember the title of it. I want to say the Weekly World News, but that's not it. That was that tabloid journal, tabloid paper that you'd get at the supermarket that had stories like boy trapped in refrigerator eats own foot type of thing.
Yes.
But it was an aggregate of like all the headlines from the previous week, and our teacher would pick a story for everybody to like write a report on and then present it in front of the class. Well, one day I got a story about UFOs. There had been a kind of like a small UFO flap going on across the United States at that time. And like I said, I had no real knowledge about UFOs, so I mean, I wrote this, this little stupid essay, and then presented it in front of the class, and then that was it. I was pegged as the flying saucer kid. I was the guy who believed in, UFOs and little green men from Mars and stuff like that. Kids are always looking for something, to hold over you. And that's what it was for me. And I mean, again, like I said, I was interested in, being a Hoosier boy. I was interested in basketball and and race cars, not little green men from outer space.
Right.
But what got to be interesting for me, and you have to remember, I mean, this carried with me all through elementary school, junior high, even into high school. Even though I really didn't exhibit any outward interest in this stuff. But, people would, they'd make fun of you when there was a group around.
Yeah.
But then later, they would come to you individually. Oh, hi. Well, now there's a cat in my office. They would come to me and they'd be, I don't believe in any of this stuff, but... And then they'd proceed to tell me stories. When they were on their family vacation, they saw a UFO, or their grandmother who passed away 2 weeks before has been appearing at the foot of their bed. Stories like that. And that's what really drew me into this stuff, were these personal stories from people who weren't interested in really telling anybody else, weren't interested in publicity, but I think that they wanted reassurance that they weren't crazy, because we go through our daily lives kind of on automation, and we have a filing system in our brains that files all that away. Get up in the morning, drink your coffee, have breakfast, drive to work, come home, eat dinner, watch television, go to bed. All right? Filed away all nice and neat. Say you have something just totally bizarre happen to you. You're driving to work and this UFO lands in front of you, and these little guys get out and gather up rocks and plants, get back in, and fly away. Where do you categorize that in that filing system that you have in your head? There's no category for that for most people.
Someone's having the case of the Mondays.
Exactly. And so people, they either ignore it, B, think they're crazy, and go through the rest of their life wondering if they've got a screw loose. And they can never tell anybody. Oh, heaven forbid, you can't tell anybody at work, can't tell family members. Family is the worst. I mean, you tell your family member, then every Thanksgiving, somebody's going to bring it up, and tease you about it. So that leaves someone like me for them to come to and tell their story. And, I listen to them, and I say, well, yeah, I've heard lots of very similar stories, and no, I don't think you're crazy. There's been, over the centuries, very, very similar encounters or happenstance. And you could just see the weight lifted off their shoulders.
Right.
And, they'll walk away. They may never ever tell anybody ever again. But they got that reassurance that that they're not crazy and it's happened to other people. And that's the factor that got me into all of this, that personal touch to all of these stories. Because sure, UFOs and ghosts and time travel and Bigfoot and all these things, they're really fascinating, but right now we don't really have a lot of physical evidence of these things. All we have are these personal stories from people. And I think that is one of the major things that a lot of researchers and investigators kind of ignore. They're too concentrated on, what planet are the flying saucers coming from? What valley is Bigfoot living in, rather than looking at all of these stories that are coming from these diverse groups of people who have no knowledge really of other people who have had similar encounters. So, I mean, that's really the main focus that got me started in all of this.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. And as for how I got it, how I was able to make somewhat of a career out of it, I just, when I started there, when I was in college, I actually wrote articles for various UFO magazines when there were UFO magazines. They're long gone now, and because of I was taking courses in television production and journalism, I had access to typewriters, nice typewriters too, and so I was able to use those to to help type up these things. But then, when my career took off in television, I really didn't have too much time to write about this stuff, but I still continued researching and investigating and keeping my files. And then when home computers came around with like WordPerfect and Microsoft Word, I didn't have to use typewriters anymore because I really hated to use typewriters. Right. Then I was able to start writing again and submitting my material to various places. And it just slowly took off from there.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, since we're kind of talking about, your research and all that, I wanted to ask, so when you're doing research for these kind of like fringe topics, right? Mm-hmm. You get personal accounts. Are there other ways in which you conduct your research, like other avenues that you get information?
Well, as well as, personal accounts, I'm very big into historical research on these various subjects, and it's a little easier now, naturally, with the internet, but a lot of search engines, Google especially, it can be really difficult prying older information out of them. If you go and Google, say, like specific subjects, you'll get a flood of very recent information, but really anything older than 10 years, it's almost impossible to find, unless you have specific keywords. And unfortunately, a lot of times with cases, you don't have that. You just have like maybe some vague ideas of what you're looking for. But over the years, I've also maintained a very large file of material, as well as, much to my wife's chagrin, books and magazines and newsletters and all kinds of things that clutter up my house, that I can go and try to dig information from. And a lot of times when I'm looking for a specific subject that doesn't pop right out in my files, because it's really difficult to categorize, say, like every single magazine or book, the individual stories and cases inside of them. So sometimes I'll just go and I'll just pull out a bunch of stuff and just start leafing through it. just to hope that maybe the universe will look kindly on me,
Right.
and that synchronicity will happen and pop something up. And you'll be surprised that happens a lot. You're looking. Yeah, looking for like a very obscure type of story. There was one I was looking for. It's been a few years ago, where my publisher, the late Timothy Green Beckley, was looking for a case about this guy in Pennsylvania who was out hunting, and he came across a landed UFO with an occupant that was out prowling around. And the occupant actually approached this guy and through sign language wanted to examine his rifle. So this guy, I mean, he handed his rifle over to this this being, and he looked it over in his hands and then handed it back, got back into the UFO, and it flew away. Later, he found that the barrel had cracked. There was a fine crack through it that wasn't there before. He could not find this story. He remembered it, and I remembered it too. And I was just like, well, let me go and check. And so I went downstairs to my library of books, and I just pulled one out and started leafing through it, and I came across that story just like that. Now, I mean, I suppose that, my unconscious remembered that particular book and that story there. That's always a possibility, but it's within like less than 10 minutes I was able to locate that story when Beckley had been looking for it for a couple of weeks.
Oh man, that's great.
Synchronicities are a pretty fun topic. I mean,
Yeah.
there's the idea that like the more you engage with the synchronicities, right, like you pay attention to it, you notice it, and you're like, you're taking stock of it, the more that happens. So probably that you notice your synchronicities, probably the frequency increases over time, like wants to play with you kind of.
Yeah, Tim Beckley was always fascinated with synchronicity and coincidences, but it frustrated him because he always thought that there should be some kind of rhyme or reason for it.
Yeah.
And he could never find any. He always wanted to write a book about synchronicities and had a pretty big collection of his own personal accounts, but he never could because he was constantly frustrated that there was never he was looking for that connection. He felt that there had to have been some kind of connection. This synchronicity happened for this reason that leads to this reason and that. And to him, they just kind of seemed there wasn't any pattern. They would just happen.
Yeah.
And it's true. I mean, for myself, the ones that happen to me are like that as well. There doesn't seem to be any there doesn't seem to be something that would, lead to say like, you're thinking about, I need to make a lot of money. And then, the synchronicities lead you in that direction. Now, it never works that way for me.
No, it's more like, it almost feels like the universe playing with you. Like, oh, you noticed this? Well, let's do another one. Let's see if you notice that, not
right.
Really, highly significant. Yeah. You might like dream of a place, like dream of, I don't know, a door, and then see it out in the wild, like, in the city somewhere that you've never been, but there's no purpose there. You weren't led there. You just were shown that. There you go. That's it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that, there is this, this web of connection that we're all involved in, with the entire, not only this universe, but the multi-universe.
Yeah.
And that synchronicity and coincidences just, really demonstrate how we are interconnected. But as for trying to find a reason why these things happen, for the most part, that's part of the mystery, isn't it? That's part of the obscure nature of all of it. And maybe someday will have a better grasp of it. There are some researchers and authors, psychologists who have written some amazing books on how to identify the patterns of synchronicity. But so far, it hasn't quite worked for me. But then again, as you pointed out at the beginning of the program, I'm so busy. Sometimes it's really
Right.
hard to concentrate, and that's what, in order to get synchronicity to work, you have to have that ability to be able to, concentrate on whatever it is that you're looking for, and then to start looking for those types of patterns. And, I'm lucky if I can find where I put my glasses in the morning. So
Same.
Yeah, I'm the same way too. And it's just like, with synchronicities, like I've worked in a lot of sales positions, and I've noticed those things too. Like randomly at 3:15, like I worked at a movie theater, and randomly at 3:15 p.m., like 30 people just show up randomly to go watch a movie. And it's dead all day, and then for some reason, a whole cluster of people would show up. And so, yeah, I'm used to seeing a lot of patterns like that. I wanted to ask a question, going back to your initial interest. You talked about you first became interested in UFOs and all of this when you were in grade school. Myself, I too became interested in grade school, but I became interested because of a personal experience that I had with seeing a UFO. It started with my father, who one night came in and he was at work, and he came rushing into the house in a full panic, and he described what he saw as this triangular ship coming down towards the car. As he was coming down the road, it got closer and closer and closer. And then he said he just saw it turn like this and then just shoot off. And then several nights later, news reports started popping up about people seeing this. And so that's kind of where my interest began. But have you ever had like a personal experience or encounter that kind of reinforced your belief in the existence of UFOs and things of that nature?
not UFOs, unfortunately. And so far, I have always hoped that I would. About the closest thing with UFOs would be one evening, maybe about 10 years ago, when I put the dog out. There was, to the southwest of me, this very bright red light in the sky. Kind of looked like a like the tail light of a car, the red tail light, and it just hanging there in the air. So I stood there and I watched it for a little bit, wondering, because of that general direction, maybe about 60 miles is an airport. And I've seen, like jets, the familiar lights when it takes off and the direction they go. But this just sat there, and so I waited to see if it was maybe an aircraft coming towards me, because at night, a plane that's coming directly at you, it doesn't look like it's moving. But then all of a sudden, it just winked out.
Ooh.
And so I waited a little while to see if it was an aircraft that went overhead, and nothing ever did. Now, I'm very familiar with the navigation lights that aircraft have, and nobody has like a single unblinking red light, and that's what this was. Yeah, it was just a steady red light. So I don't know. I mean, it's so hard to tell with lights in the sky what it is that you're looking at. But that's the closest to an unknown aerial object. But now when it comes to paranormal things, I've had a number of unusual, what you could call ghostly events. No, like full body apparitions or anything like that. The one case that I talk quite a bit about, and it's fascinating. I was working at a television station in Dayton, Ohio, when this happened, and there had been it's a really famous a poltergeist case that was taking place in Columbus, Ohio, at the time. And there's a famous photograph, in fact, that was taken in this house of this young girl sitting on a chair, and there's a phone that had been thrown, and it was going, like flying across her with the cable trailing behind it, and she's like, like that.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah. Well, I was actually in that house a couple of days previously when they had like a news conference. So I mean, my station was there. Some stations from Columbus were there, and newspapers. And this photograph had taken place a couple of days later, when it was just one newspaper reporter, I think is what it was, and he just happened to catch this as it happened. Well, my station got a phone call from this couple from Springfield, Ohio, and they had seen our stories, and they were having a poltergeist experience going on in their house, and they were wanting to know if there was anybody there who would be interested in helping them out. Now, the assignment editor knew that I was interested in this stuff, and they weren't really interested in doing a story on it. And, these people weren't really interested in having a story done themselves. They just were curious if maybe somebody could come and, talk to them and maybe, help them figure out what was going on. So I agreed to do it, and I drove up there. I took my camera, which at that time, this would have been in the probably around 83. So television equipment then consisted of 3/4-inch tapes. And you had this big honking camera that you'd have to wear, have on your shoulders, and then you had a separate deck that you would put the tape in, that it was all connected with a cable then to record everything. Well, the camera and the decks had their own separate batteries. All right. Yeah. And these were big, powerful batteries too. So I made sure that everything was charged, had enough tapes, went to talk to these people. And I hadn't been in that house more than 10 minutes. Every battery that I had was dead. And I was, when you do news, you always have to make sure that your batteries are charged, you have enough tapes, everything is working, because you just never know, when something's going to happen. But no, everything was dead. The only thing that did work is I had a small little film camera, not movie film, but it was a 35 millimeter film, and that was the only thing that had a battery. It had one of those little flat batteries that ran the light meter inside of it. That didn't die. That was the only thing. So I couldn't record anything on tape. How convenient, right? So I was sitting in the living room with this couple. They were an elderly couple that had just recently brought in their younger niece and nephew, grandchildren to live with them, because both of their parents were in jail. Girl was about 11 or 12. I can't remember exactly. The boy was about 9. Shortly after these kids moved in is when the activity started. And I mean, it wasn't really severe. Knocks on the walls, furniture moving around. I mean, most people are like, oh my God, that's severe. Nah, it's just kind of minor stuff. Things disappearing and reappearing. But it was enough to spook them out, because, I mean, they had no idea what was going on until they saw the stories that was going on in Columbus. And they're like, this sounds like what's going on with us. So I was sitting in their living room, and they were telling me what had been going on. Where I was positioned, I could see down the hallway. And at the end of the hallway was the bedroom of these kids. They were sitting on the bed playing a game, like a board game. So I had a clear sight of everybody. And all of a sudden, there was this loud boom in the house. Didn't sound like thunder. It sounded more like somebody had hit the house with something. Wow. Just imagine if you would take a car and drive into the side of the house without breaking through the wall. That's kind of what it sounded like to me. And this couple, they turned to each other and then turned to me, and they're like, oh, it's going to start now. And I'm like, oh yeah, really? And then from the ceiling above me, and it was just a blank ceiling, there was no overhead light, like a lot of these like ranch. It was a ranch style home out in the country. And from this ceiling, all of a sudden, rocks, little tiny rocks, started to appear and fall down to the floor.
Oh man, that is not okay.
And they were like little white limestone rocks that you would find in a driveway. And in fact, they had the same kind of rocks in their driveway. But looking up, and it looked like that the rocks would just appear just underneath the ceiling and then drop to the floor. And about 5 rocks appeared, fell to the floor. And they were like, wow, that's never happened before.
Yeah.
So I gathered up these rocks, and like a lot of people report that after something like this, the rocks are warm, but to me, they felt room temperature, maybe even cooler. So I got the bright idea of, I took out a magic marker and I marked these rocks with an X, big black X. And then I went out to the back door, and they had kind of like a small backyard, and then it was cornfield. Just, and this would have been August, so the corn was pretty high. And I chucked all of these rocks one by one out in different directions in this cornfield. And I'm like, let's see what happens now. And sure enough, as soon as I sat back down, it started again. Rocks appearing and falling. And not all of them, but some of those rocks were the rocks that I had marked with an X and chucked out into the cornfield.
That is wild.
And you said they were limestone?
Yeah, like a driveway rock, I mean, I've got the same kind of rocks, in my driveway, maybe about no bigger than a dime, less than the size than a quarter, that side of thing. And in fact, I'm positive they were the same rocks that they had in their driveway. That, I think that was what the source of them. And the funny thing about it is that nothing else happened that night. And then when I did some follow-ups, they said that the phenomena had basically died down. They said that it just, from that point, it just almost disappeared completely. He said, for a day or two, there may have been some noises and stuff, but it was like all the energy had been spent when I was there, and then that was it. So it was a very, very fascinating case, and I mean, it to this day it still stands out naturally, in my memory.
They're probably like, oh man, these guys are going so far as bringing in a camera crew. We better knock it off.
Well, I mean, whatever was going on, it made sure that I couldn't gather any evidence, with the exception of the rocks. I still have a couple of those, somewhere in my house. A lot of people afterwards, they said to me, oh, you don't want to bring that stuff home, because the phenomena will follow you. But nah, nothing like that ever happened to me. Most of the time when it comes to psychic stuff, I tend to be kind of a dead end with it. Though, like I said, I've had some interesting, what could be, ghostly or PK types of experiences. But I think most of that was because I just happened to be at the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just found it interesting that you said limestone, because common time is limestones, seems to pop up in paranormal activities, something about how it's able to conduct energy. They talked about it with us at the Crescent. I've read about limestone, and the Egyptians used limestone on the pyramids and all of that. So I just found that interesting that when you said it was limestone, I was like, so yeah.
Yeah, it seems to be a trend. It's like if you build stuff with too much limestone, you're gonna get haunted. Back off the limestone, man.
Well, here in Indiana and Ohio, there's a lot of limestone.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like say around Bloomington, Indiana. I mean, there are huge quarries that they've used the limestone to build, say, like the Empire State Building and
Yeah.
the Capitol buildings at in Washington D.C. So and that field of limestone extends all the way over into Ohio and probably Illinois as well.
Yeah. So I gotta to get into some Tesla specific questions. One that I've been dying to ask you about, and the first chapter on your book about Tesla's journals, you introduced us to Dale Alfrey,
Mhm.
and his buying up some boxes for $25 on a whim, and the story that followed from there. So I was curious about how you learned of Dale's story, because when I went trying to find any other information about him, like all my searches just circled back around to people talking about your book. So
Mhm.
it's like, oh man, it seems like Tim got the exclusive on the Dale Alfrey story. So like, did you ever get to meet Dale, or how'd you learn about him?
Yeah, this his story actually came to me from the late Jim Keefe. I don't know if you're familiar with Jim, but he wrote and and we kind of worked along with a lot of the same people, but Jim wrote books about, say, like black helicopters and the Men in Black, and he was in his day. I mean, he did a lot of work. He also did work for the same guy who published my book, Tim Beckley. And Dale Alfrey had first approached Jim with his story, but Jim wasn't really that interested in Tesla.
Yeah.
But he knew that Beckley was, and then Beckley knew that I was. So that's how the story actually got to me through that route. And I did meet Dale, and of course that's a pseudonym. That's not
Yes.
that's not his real name. He because of the all the the stuff that happened to him,
Right.
he kind of wanted to he kind of wanted, after a while, he kind of wanted to forget about it all, because it kind of
I don't blame him.
yeah, it kind of spooked him out. But it's a fascinating story because I had been fascinated by Nikola Tesla ever since I would, and again, this happened when I was working at that TV station in Dayton, Ohio, because the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is right next to Dayton, and we used to. I worked with a reporter who, couple times a month, we would go to Wright-Patterson to look for some kind of interesting story that they were doing there. And they had a press. Wright-Patterson had a press liaison that would offer up stories that we could report on. And we were sitting in this guy's office. I think he was like a lieutenant. And he was going through his files, trying to find us, something interesting that we could report on, and that wasn't, covered up in various kinds of secrecies.
Yeah.
And he made this offhand comment. He was like, "Well, we're working on some stuff from that mad scientist Tesla." He goes, but I can't really talk about it right now." And then
Oh,
he went on to something else. And I have to admit, at that point, and again, this was in the early '80s, I don't think I'd ever heard of Nikola Tesla before. But
right.
that name, mad scientist Tesla. Okay, who's this? Who's this guy?
That's
I
a
want to know.
tease.
Yeah, I want to know more about him. And and there wasn't a lot written about him at the time. And of course, there's no internet. But I did have access to, various kinds of like the old records from, say, like the Hearst News Service,
Yeah.
the Nexus Lexus, things like that. So I was able to dig out some information about him. So then, when this story about Dale Alfrey and him coming across this wonderful material that Tesla had probably lost isn't quite the right word. More than likely, Tesla had this stuff stored away in one of the hotels that he lived at later on in his life. And then when he had to move, the hotel probably held on to this material as collateral in order to hopefully that Tesla would be able to come up with the money to pay his bills. That was one of the reasons that he had to move to several different locations later on in his life, because supposedly he didn't have a lot of money. But anyway, so then after Tesla died, probably this stuff was sold off. Who knows? When Dale Alfrey found it, he was a book buyer. He would go to various auctions, consignment sales and things like that, and buy whatever, he thought looked interesting. He was especially interested in antique books. And he had come across this box of books, and he looked at the top layer. He was like, okay, this looks interesting, and he bought it. And didn't spend a lot, probably, like I said, probably about $25 or so. But when he got back, he found out that underneath these books were all these notes and journals and schematics and just all kinds of interesting things from and for quite a while he could never make out the handwriting, the person who had the signature, and eventually he discovered it was Nikola Tesla. Well, like me and a lot of other people, he had no idea who Nikola Tesla was. Yeah. And again, very, very early days of the internet. It wasn't like he could, fire up Google and find out who Tesla was. He did have a home computer, but I'm trying to remember. I think about the only thing that he was connected to were some of the old bulletin boards that were available at the time, like over like CompuServe or Usenet, that sort of thing. So since he wasn't getting any information, he decided that maybe he would go and start trying to scan this material, and the material that he couldn't scan, he was going and just typing it out himself using like just a plain like a text generator that he had on his computer, and at the same time he was reaching out to various people through Usenet to see if anybody had ever heard of Nikola Tesla and if this stuff was of any value, because that's what he was interested in. Not so much that it could be of like any scientific interest. He thought that maybe this could be like valuable, that he could sell. That's what his the whole thing he was looking at was whether or not that he could sell this and make some money off of it naturally. But what happened was that one day he got a knock on the door, and he went to answer it, and there were a couple of guys standing there, and I'm trying to remember now. And you have to remember, I wrote this book back starting like 1998. So but he said that they were dressed in suits and ties.
The black. I remember because I quoted your book in the episode on that part, like black suits, white shirts, black ties, and they all had like the weird hair and whatnot.
And they looked like very undertakers.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, he said that he got the impression that maybe he thought they were like FBI or something like that, because their hair was very closely cropped, not military style, not buzz cut, but just like very like they had just come back from the barber. He said, but they were asking him. They were asking him questions that really didn't seem to have any point to it. He thought maybe at first that they were like Mormons, trying to give him religious or Jehovah's Witness or something like that. They were talking at one point. They were talking about taking photographs in the neighborhood. That they were there to ask homeowners if they could take pictures of their homes and then sell the pictures to them afterwards. And he said it was just just kind of a meandering bizarre conversation, and obviously it was a conversation to keep him occupied, because when he got back into his office, which was located in the back part of his kitchen,
Yeah.
close to the back, close to his back door, which had like a screened-in porch to it, somebody else had broken in and had taken everything, including the hard drive of his computer. Now you have to remember, this was like one of those big honking. Probably an IBM or something like that.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they had
I've dissected those back in the day.
yeah, well, they
One
they
does
had
not take it off.
actually managed to take the back of it off and take the hard drive out of it, which I mean, there wasn't much of probably not less than a gigabyte
Yeah.
size of a hard drive, but they managed to get that. They got all of he was saving everything that he was writing down from these notes on floppy disks. The little, not the big of actual floppy disks, but more the hard ones. People don't remember
Yeah,
those anymore. But he had like a whole stack of those things, and all of the material that he had, because he had it all there by his table that he was working on. Nothing else. That was the only thing that they took.
Man,
And yeah, so and he was really flummoxed. He thought once again that this material had monetary value,
yeah.
and that because he had been asking over Usenet, if anybody had ever heard of Tesla, that somebody had figured out where he lived and had stolen it, because then they could sell it. It wasn't until afterwards that he found out who Nikola Tesla was, and then myself and Beckley, when we got involved and started doing the research ourselves on how Tesla's material had mysteriously disappeared after he died, that's when we started putting kind of like, two and two together to come out with six. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is some of that material that people have been looking for, all of these years, that got, that the FBI didn't get a hold of it. Now, now somebody else has,
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's a weird story. And I've had other people approach me over the years after I wrote the book and say, hey, I've got this stuff. I know what happened to it. We're the ones who take it, but, none of it has ever panned out. It's just people trolling me. Obviously, this was a government/military effort to continue collecting this material that's been lost for whatever reasons, which to me has always been kind of odd, because while Tesla was alive, he petitioned the government and the military to, he offered them his inventions and his ideas for, give me a little bit of money so I can, work on this on my laboratory, and I'll be successful with it. And he was always ignored. And it wasn't until he died, then everybody was like, oh my gosh, we got to get a hold of this stuff. And the opportunity was missed while he was alive, and why they suddenly decided to jump on it after he died, that's always been a mystery to me.
I was wondering about that, because I found it so funny that they were like, busting into this guy's house to steal all the stuff, when just, a few decades earlier, you've been going, "Hey, I'll give it to you. Just give me a few bucks."
Well, and the other interesting thing is that in the 1950s, they had actually the material that they got, they returned to Yugoslavia because Tesla had been born in what at that point would have been Yugoslavia. When he was born, it would have been part of the Austro-Hungary alliance. Later, like Croatia, and then Yugoslavia. But the government, the communist government in Belgrade was in the process of building a Tesla museum and asked the United States to return to them any material that they had, and they did. So, if that's always flummoxed me as well, that they just willingly gave that stuff up, unless they had already, had their own copies or kept any really good stuff. But some other researchers who had been allowed access to some of this material in Belgrade, said that there were some very interesting like blueprints of Tesla's wireless transmitter of electricity that was there, and other things. So it's always been a mystery on why the United States government, first of all, was so interested in getting a hold of this stuff, and then later on just let it go. To at the time the communists.
yeah, it's wild. So your book or that particular book was first published around 2000, I believe, which at the time, like that's also the time about that Dell's story ends in the book, where you were talking about like he basically had grown frustrated because at that point he was just hitting a brick wall on finding out any new information. So in the 20 years since then, have you heard anything else from Dell, or did he ever get any further?
No, I mean, once that happened with him, he just, he kind of really just washed his hands of the whole affair and didn't want anything else. Didn't want anything else to do with it. It spooked him, first of all, that somebody could have gotten into his house that easily without him knowing it and steal it. And, he was generally afraid that he had gotten on the wrong side of some kind of government agency. And I'm saying this because, he's passed away. He's been gone for a number of years now. And at some point I talked to his stepdaughter, and he had gotten he was estranged from really all of his family, his ex-wife and then her children. But his stepdaughter told me that due to the nature of his work, which mostly was of buying and reselling antiques, that maybe he played a little fast and loose with his taxes.
Okay.
And that he, after this whole Tesla thing, I guess he was always just afraid that the government was going to go and swoop down and bring the IRS into play and, take him out. But she said nothing ever happened. He said that he just was kind of, he was just kind of paranoid about the whole, the whole situation the rest of his life. No, I don't either.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he was just afraid that he had gotten on the wrong side of the government and really didn't want to, shake those branches any longer. And that was one of the reasons why he passed the story on to us and then just said, you could ask me a couple more questions, but that's about it. I don't want anything to do with it.
I can imagine, especially just from the standpoint of like, dude, I was just trying to sell some science books.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and this was a guy. I mean, he had never heard of like the Men in Black or government agents coming to your house, stealing stuff, or again, who Nikola Tesla was and why anybody would be interested in this pile of kind of moldy, hard to read material, because Tesla didn't do a lot of his own writing. Most of his material was written up. He had assistants who did most of this writing for him.
Yeah.
And when he did write his own stuff, it was hard to read. And that's a lot of the material that he had had obviously been handwritten by Tesla, and there was other more neatly written material, but it was just kind of like this hodgepodge of stuff. That looked like it had just kind of been, haphazardly thrown into this box. I mean, there wasn't any specific types of material that led in any direction. A one layer would be just like a bill for various laboratory equipment that had been bought. Yeah. And then the next thing would be observations of electrical effects at different voltages, stuff like that. There was one of the interesting things that was in there was Tesla's observations of radio transmissions, or his reception of radio transmissions that had taken place when he was in Colorado Springs in 1899. Yeah. He had gone there to first to try to see if lightning could actually be harnessed to power things. But he soon discovered that the static electricity that lightning's made of is just would be impossible, at least for that the technology in that day to do anything about. But what he had a radio receiver in order to be able to tell when storms were coming. And he was using just basically the AM band. And I don't, a lot of people aren't familiar anymore with AM radio. Right. But if you have your AM radio on and there's thunderstorms going on, the lightning will create static. Anytime there's a bolt produced, you'll hear static on the radio. So he was using that to be able to hone in on where thunderstorms were and how close they were, if they were approaching his laboratory and things like that. Well, one evening he started to receive what he thought were intelligent signals. Yeah. That due to the way that I guess his antenna was positioned, was coming from space. It wasn't coming from any terrestrial source. And you have to remember at that time, radio wasn't a thing yet. So as far as he knew, as far as any of us know, there wasn't anybody out there transmitting on any radio frequencies. And because of that, he developed kind of an interest in whether or not these were actually intelligent signals coming from space or somewhere else. And it eventually led to him working with various other frequencies and actually receiving what he thought were Well, I mean, he said that he was receiving like voice transmissions. Now,
Yeah.
the voice transmissions were coming years later when radio was a thing, but he was picking them up on frequencies that really aren't don't really allow for voice types of transmissions. And so, I mean, he felt that maybe he was on to some kind of evidence that we're not alone on this planet.
Yeah, about those voice transmissions, I had a question about that because when
Mhm.
we were talking about it during our episode on that. So he started out listening, and then from what I gathered from some of the details of later in his life with these transmissions, that he was actually getting some messages that he understood from some of those transmissions. And what we were trying to figure out is that at least when he was first talking about it, he talked about I think in his words he was saying is like it was clearly a voice, but it was unintelligible. It wasn't English, French, German, anything he knew. So how was he eventually able to understand what he was hearing?
And again, this is based on what Dale Alfrey told me from his memories when he was typing this stuff up. And again, this material was incomplete. It would be a page here or a page there.
Right.
That talked about this, which very frustrating because I mean apparently Tesla would be on a thought about something and then the next page wasn't there, so but yes, some of these voice transmissions, he said, were, and I think the words were, as he put it, garbled, and he couldn't be sure if they were actually if the voices were actually talking like that, or if it was some kind of byproduct of the frequency he was listening in on. To me, it almost sounds like on shortwave that there are people who talk on what are called like sidebands
Yeah.
that they're able to transmit and I'm gonna muck this up probably people who know more about shortwave and ham radio operators will be like no that's not what it is, but anyway, you're able to talk over longer distances and use less power by talking on sideband, and unless you have a certain item on your receiver, the transmission sound garbled. It sounds like robots talking back and forth to each other. But he did say that occasionally he would get voices in languages that he understood.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, not a lot, but a few. And one of the things that got him worried, I guess, later in his life was that he didn't, he was beginning to wonder whether or not that these transmissions weren't coming from outer space, but were coming from some kind of terrestrial source.
Yeah.
That he wondered if, whatever these voices, whatever the source of these voices were, that they were here talking.
Interesting.
And I speculated in the book that these could actually be the equivalent of EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, which in Tesla's day there had been some research already being conducted, but I don't think that Tesla was familiar with that at all. But some of his descriptions that that Dale Alfrey was telling me, based on what he had read, sound an awful lot like electronic voice phenomena, these like snatches of conversation, some sentences here or there that would make sense. So it's hard to say. A lot of people think that EVPs are messages that you're getting from discarnate entities, voices of the dead, that sort of thing. But I think that there could be all kinds of different sources, for EVPs. That we live in a very, very big universe with all kinds of multiverses and other types of sources that that these types of EVPs could be coming from. Could be voices from the dead, could be other realities. It's really hard to say. But yeah, I mean, I think that Tesla was unknowingly one of the earliest pioneers of the whole EVP thing.
Oh man, that'd be wild. Yes, that is very cool.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, now we'd probably call it ITV, uh, because he was using sources other than what we think of as the traditional EVP. Somebody who just takes like a tape recorder in a haunted house and maybe gets a word here or there that you can barely understand. But with ITV, some of these people are getting like whole conversations and complete sentences, music, direct messages. There was several groups in Europe, especially Germany and Luxembourg in the 1980s, that were using computers and televisions to receive video images, from these sources. So, Tesla looks like that once again that he was the pioneer of something that we're just now kind of getting a grasp on.
That's not surprising given it was Tesla.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, he was a pioneer in so many things,
Right.
and it does my heart good to see now.
Yeah.
He's being appreciated a lot more than, I mean, when I wrote the book originally, again, not that many people had heard about Tesla, and really had no idea about the just the marvelous contributions, to our modern, technology, this our electronic age, all came about from this guy who started his work in the 19th century.
Yeah. Yeah. At the very turn of it, no less.
Yeah, I didn't even know who Nikola
Mhm.
Tesla was until I think I saw an episode. I don't know if it was Unsolved Mysteries or one of those shows, and that was the first time. And I was a young man,
Yeah.
when I
Yeah.
first learned of who Nikola
Glad
Tesla
he's getting
was.
some love now.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, when I went to school, elementary and high school, there was no mention of Tesla.
Yeah.
Everything was Edison. Edison,
Edison.
Edison, Edison. Edison was the inventor of electricity, basically.
Yep.
Is what they told us. The electricity that comes into your house is thanks to Edison. And it's just, it's really, I mean, it's like Edison propaganda.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Fortunately now, I think that the education is starting to correct that, but still, I think that they've got a long ways to go in teaching this
Yeah.
the wonderful contributions that Tesla had.
Absolutely. So the other major person in your book that popped up that really got my interest was Arthur Matthews, the assistant, got to be Tesla's assistant up in Canada, and so I was curious about him too. I imagine you probably never got to talk to him because he would have been ancient, right? But how did you learn about him and his story?
Well, this once again, and you're absolutely right. I'd never even heard of Arthur Matthews, and it's still debatable. There's still people who debate whether or not he was telling the truth, was upfront.
Right. That's a lot of
with,
claims for sure.
yeah, yeah, and but again, Timothy Green Beckley was familiar with his work. I don't think Beckley had ever met him, but it was a situation where he worked with researchers from Canada who brought Matthew's story to him, and I guess some of his material as well, because he produced at least one, maybe two booklets about his experiences. And the Canadian government was interested in Matthew's. Especially, I think it was in the it was like the 1950s with their Project Magnet, um, which was their attempt to try to hone in on the UFO phenomena. They had built at least one, maybe several points of operation in Canada to use as like UFO detectors. The theory was that as UFOs flew, whatever they were using for their propulsion systems would affect the local electromagnetic fields. And so they had these buildings that had these devices, very sensitive devices, that were made to look for these disruptions. And then they actually had physical people staying at these buildings. So if there was if these devices noted a disruption, then these people would actually go out with like binoculars and telescopes and cameras to try to see if there was anything going on. As far as I know, at least with the release documents, nobody ever was able to see or find anything. There may have been some photographs of what may have been anomalous objects in the sky, but I don't think that the project ended up being as successful as they wanted it to be. At least that's what the released information was. Again, this was a Canadian government project, so I mean they were under no they had no reason to release all of it if they didn't want to.
Right.
But a lot of this was based on the material that Matthews had written about, and Matthews was writing about it based on his alleged work with Tesla, and I haven't talked about Matthews in quite a while, so my memory is rather vague on this, so you'll have to forgive me. But Matthew had developed, what did he call it? Was it the Tesla scope?
Yes.
Okay. And it was this device that he said, based on Tesla's theories, and it was based on Tesla's theories with from his reception of those anomalous signals at Colorado Springs, that this was going to be a device that could be used to communicate directly with extraterrestrial sources. All right. Now, I don't remember, and please forgive me on this, I don't remember if this was going to be something that, like you would aim at, say, like UFOs to try to communicate with them, or if it was an attempt to actually try to signal and communicate with extraterrestrial races on other worlds. Like I said, it's been a while, and unfortunately, a lot of Matthew's material was extremely lacking in just exactly what the Tesla scope was supposed to do.
Right.
But yeah, it was all part of this effort to continue the work of Tesla, and in the effort to establish some kind of communication with alleged extraterrestrials. Now, what we know about space and the distances of space, this would have to be something that wouldn't work using just radio, regular radio signals, because radio signals, you can only travel as fast as the speed of light, and like the closest solar system to ours is Proxima Centauri, I think, and that's at least 5-10 light years away. So, so that would be if you were trying to contact using just regular radio signals, that would be, say, 5 light years. That would be 5 years out and then 5 years back.
Right.
So obviously, they were working on something that was going to go beyond the speed of light. Which sounds kind of suspiciously like what we would now would be calling, quantum tunneling, which would just bypass, physical space time completely, and just, it would just, contact from point A to point B instantaneously. But it's hard to say. Matthews also claimed that that he had established communications with extraterrestrial beings that were here. His children, after the fact, I guess, told researchers, and this was something that Matthews didn't talk about a lot, that at some point after using his device or experimenting with his device, with the telescope, that these beings actually appeared on his property and, came into his house for long conversations. But his children weren't really sure what these conversations were about. Only that I think one of them, like his son, saw at least one time, these guys, and he described them as kind of like the traditional 1950s contactee types of people, like tall, white-skinned, very blonde, big blue eyes, that sort of thing. Coming over, visit, cup of coffee, sit around, talk for a while.
That's such a Canadian way to have an alien encounter. Let's just hang out and have dinner.
That's right.
Hey, just come over, eh? We'll have a cup of coffee. It'll be a great time.
It's the best thing.
And the thing about him is that he's been largely forgotten, I think, probably because of how fantastic his story is. I mean, other than the schematics, which were very crude schematics of the telescope, and there were some pictures, I guess. I've seen some pictures that were taken at around the time that he was working on them of at least a model in construction. But for as any, like definitive proof that it worked or that any of this stuff happened, it's extremely lacking, which is unfortunate. And but as we know all too well, that when it comes to stuff like this, that happens a lot. And it's kind of the nature of the beast, unfortunately, which again, it makes me think that a lot of these types of devices that these people are coming up with, that they do work, but only for them. All right.
Yeah.
That it's almost like, and I don't know if you're familiar with what are called black boxes. Some people will call them, like radionics boxes. These devices do work, but a lot of times only for the operator. And that if somebody else would take a hold of it and try to operate it, they would never work. So naturally, any scientist worth his salt is just going to outright dismiss it because it's not something that can be reproducible in a lab.
Right.
But time and again, I've seen these types of situations where these people are able to make these things work and work well and produce some astounding results. But then after, say, like they either pass away or they try to get somebody else to work with it, they never work again. So naturally, a lot of people are just going to look at that and just, snort derisively and say, well, they're just hoaxing. They're just trying to make a buck off of it. But most of these people, like Matthews, don't get rich out of doing these things and appear not to be interested in getting rich. They have a dream, so to speak. They have a vision that they're trying to accomplish, and that's their goal, to try to get, to try to make something happen that they think should work. So I don't know. It's a very interesting phenomena.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was actually watching you on another podcast, the Typical Skeptic podcast, and you guys were talking about mimics, which is
Your latest book.
yeah, I was about to say one of your newer books. And so I actually wanted to ask you if you have had a personal experience with mimics.
Myself, no. Again, like I've said, I tend to be kind of like a psychic dead end. When it comes to these kind of things, no. Unfortunately, at least as far as I know.
Right.
I haven't. But as for the basis of the book, which is mimics the others among us, I've talked to a lot of people who have had firsthand experiences with these things, and which, I mean, they come in all kinds of shapes and sizes throughout history. The one defining characteristic of the mimics is their human appearance, and that's part of the whole book. Is that throughout history we've had interactions with these things, and these things may come from all kinds of different sources. But the defining aspect of them is their human appearance. Now there may be some characteristics that are off. Say eyes are bigger, mouths are bigger. They walk differently. What have you. But overall, they look human enough to not be noticed for the most part, in a crowd. Now, most people who have had close interactions with them, and again, I mean, these are things that, and we've got all kinds of different categories for them in the book, which includes the so-called extraterrestrials, fairies or fays.
Yeah.
Other types of mythological creatures, even right up to looking at Bigfoot and other types of humanoid cryptids. But for the most part, people who have had close interactions with them, like standing next to each other talking, most people will get the impression that there's something not right, that that the person that they're talking to, some people have described them as not being real. That's or one person said that they thought they were talking to a dead person.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah. And then other people, they can't really describe what it is that they're feeling, but they'll just feel like a primal fear. All right. That almost, kind of like the feeling that you would have if you were right next to, say, like a lion or tiger with no fence in between you, that at any moment you're going to get eaten. That's I've gotten that a lot from people who have had these, like the close interactions. But then again, there are some people who say that even though they have the feeling that they're not talking to somebody who is human, they don't get a bad feeling. A lot of times they get like almost a euphoric feeling about them. Like they're unnaturally happy. And it's like almost like, gosh, I am so lucky to be talking to this type of, to this person. I don't know why, and a lot of times it's not until afterwards, when the interaction is over, that they're just like, wait a minute, why was I feeling that way? This was a totally bizarre encounter, yet I wasn't even blinking an eye about it. So there seems to be some kind of, in some cases, almost like maybe a mind control, that you're not going to be afraid during this encounter, and then the opposite effect, that fear factor, which I think that a lot of people have this natural instinct when they're up against something that they can sense is not normal, or at least and you get this too with people who have had encounters with beings that they've seen coming out of say like UFOs, that even though they're not, it's a strange situation, and the things look human, but they look kind of strange, but they'll have this really primal terror, they're just terrified in their gut, that they're so scared they can't even run. They're just paralyzed on the spot. So I wonder if there is this innate ability within us to be able to sense something that's just not, just completely not normal.
Right.
But yeah, you get that a lot. There was one case of this guy. He worked for the publisher that published Whitley Strieber's first book, Communion. And him and his wife were in a bookstore in New York just right after this book came out to check out the display that the bookstore had for Communion. And while they were there, he noticed this couple come in, and they're dressed in coat, heavy coats, and they had scarves like wrapped around to the lower parts, and big sunglasses and hats. And they went directly to this display and were, going through a copy of Communion, and they were making comments like, oh, well, yeah, he got that right. And, oh, boy, he really didn't get that right at all, types of things. So, he went up to them and, he's like, excuse me, I work for the publisher, and, I heard your comment. You mind telling me, like what you're seeing right or wrong about this book? And he said that the woman looked at him, and he could see, first of all, her scarf had kind of come down a little bit, that her skin was extremely pale, and that her chin came down to a very sharp point. But she had big sunglasses on, and she was wearing them inside this building, and it was wintertime. So, not the brightest of days, but he said that he could see her eyes through the sunglasses, and he said that they looked to him, and he said that it wasn't the lenses that was doing this. This is the way her eyes looked. He said that her eyes were unnaturally large, almond-shaped, and reached around the side of her head.
Nope.
Whoa.
Nope. Mm-mm.
But he said that she looked up at him. She didn't say a thing, but he said that he got the impression, first of all, that she hated him. And that he said he got the same feeling that you would get from a mad dog that was getting ready to bite you. And he was just like, oh, and just backed off, and then they left.
That's unsettling.
Yeah. So, but see, that's a typical mimic encounter.
Yeah. So I didn't read Communion, but in it aren't some of the entities kind of like praying mantis like or insect like?
Some of them, yes. Yeah. There was a number of different ones. There was like the little blue guys. And there was a name, I can't remember what the name now for them was, that they were kind of the guys that they did a lot of the work. They were the ones that would appear and maybe take him to places and acted like that they were very familiar with him, and what he was doing, like they were old friends that he couldn't remember. And one of the interesting things is that these in his subsequent books, he's kind of come along the lines that possibly that these beings that he's been in contact with are more interdimensional and kind of and work on the levels of what we would call the afterlife.
Oh,
And that he now thinks that these beings are working to try to develop really like a communion with us, because they desire to have our experiences. All right. That the realities that they exist on is timeless, and that the past, the present, and the future is all at once to them. So there's no mystery, no nothing. And that they want to enjoy that mystery that we have. And he says,
we're reality TV for them.
yes, exactly. Yeah, that's a very good point. And that and that they are wanting to experience that, and they do that by trying to establish communications with us. Now, Paul Eno, who's written a number of really great books along these lines, he would call these things parasites. See, he thinks that like like a lot of the poltergeist phenomena and things like that are from these. He says that they are living creatures, but they just exist on another reality from ours, but are able, to interact with us, and that the reason that they create hauntings and poltergeist activity is to elicit fear and strong emotions in us. And that's a smorgasbord for them. They feed off of that energy. So, if you have, say, like a haunted house or a poltergeist activity, and they hear somebody say, "Oh, well, this could be demonic," then sure enough, they're going to start doing things to make it look like it's demonic. Turning crosses upside down, burning Bibles, that whole thing, because that's going to elicit that fear response. And so the things that Whitley is writing about now, his later books, Paul Eno would say, well, yeah, they're trying to commune, with us because we are their supper. Yeah. But that's something that, in mimics, I mean, we address that as well, that, some of these cases do seem to be almost a communion with beings that view us in one way or another as a food source. But that's something that has always been. I mean, we like to think that we are at the top of the food chain, but why would we think that? You look throughout history, and there does seem to be other things in this reality, or maybe visiting this reality, or who knows, that do use humans as a source of energy, as a source of food.
It's funny, if I may interject, something you said just a minute ago about the past and the present and the future. That kind of reminded me of something Einstein said, which was the distinction between the past, the present, and the future. It's only a stubbornly persistent illusion. Which actually, if I can use that to segue to a question I had for you, if I can, real quick. I was reading your piece, "The Stranger in the Apartment Building." And where you talk about seeing a man walking across the parking lot toward what you later discovered was just an unoccupied building. And when you looked away, it was as if the scene had reset itself.
Mhm.
And from a layman's perspective, it almost sounds like a temporal replay, rather than perhaps a ghost. And it kind of and that's, going back to what Einstein said about the persistent illusion. Um, is that something you've considered uh, when you witnessed something like this, rather than it just being like a ghost or a spirit?
Hmm. Yeah, it's that's one of those situations that it's still. Excuse me, if you hear a noise, that's the cat trapped in my office trying to. Looks like now he's trying to dig his way through the wall to get out. Um, Stop it. That was a strange circumstance, and I'll tell the audience just real quick what it was. I was doing some um, real estate photographs of this the outside of this apartment complex, and at one point I saw this guy coming across the parking lot towards a building that would have been on my right. All right. And I noticed him because he was dressed rather eccentrically. He was carrying a bag of groceries, and he was wearing like shorts and a very brightly colored shirt, and like a brightly colored hat. And it was kind of cool outside, so I mean, it seemed kind of odd that he was dressed this way. And it seemed like that maybe he had somewhat of a limp. But he walked across the parking lot towards this building. So I went back to work. A couple minutes later, I looked up again, and here is this guy coming across the parking lot again. Not almost, it was the exactly same position that I had seen him previously, coming back again, walking the very same way, carrying the very same bag. It was like somebody had taken, like a videotape and had run it back and replayed it again.
Wow.
I thought it was kind of odd at the time, but it's one of those situations, and I've had people tell me this story as well. I mean, say that when they're experiencing something odd at the time, they may say, "Oh, well, that's weird," and then that's it. And then it's not until afterwards that they're like, "Oh, wait a minute, that was really weird. Why did I why did I ignore that?" And it was kind of like that, with me. But then again, in the city, you see a lot of oddly dressed people. But it was the fact that he was repeating this motion almost exactly a few minutes later, and I hadn't seen him, and he would have had to have run out of this building across the street and then come back again in the amount of time. And I don't think that would have been possible. But later, when I told the real estate agent, she was like, "Well, that's weird." She said, "That building is currently under renovation. There's nobody living there." And then later she contacted me and told me that it was even more odd because there used to be somebody who lived in that building who was suffered from I think it was Down syndrome, but lived on their own, and one of their daily activities was going across the street to the local grocery store, getting their day's worth of food, and then coming back across that parking lot. But he was no longer alive. He had been hit by a car at some point in the past, and naturally, I mean, was no longer living in that building. So, I had said earlier that I've never seen a full-bodied apparition, and I still don't think that I was seeing an apparition. I think that I was seeing a glitch in space-time.
Yeah.
That possibly this was something that, because this guy did this all the time, somehow it was either imprinted or on the environment, or who knows, it's like you said, Chris. I mean, Einstein and Tesla had both made comments about our perception of time is really just based on our physicality and not the reality of how it actually operates. So it could be that the past, the present, and the future all exist at the same time, and it's just a matter of location. And I say that that time is actually a location, putting that in three-dimensional terms because that's the only way that we can conceive it. But you think of time as being a location, that the past is down the street, the present is on this block, and then the future is a block over, and that if you had the ability, being three-dimensional beings, to navigate in the fourth dimension, that you could walk down the block to the past and walk up the block for the future. So maybe that was the case, with this experience, that under the right conditions we can catch glimpses of not only things that have happened in the past, but possibly even things that are going to happen in the future.
Yeah.
Which is one of the things that we talk about in a new book that we're currently working on, that I'm hoping will get finished and published soon. We're still awaiting some additional chapters from some of our dedicated writers, but I'm really excited about it because, like you, I mean, the mysteries of time is a favorite subject of mine. And a lot of people love it as well.
It
Yes.
you reminded me of something I'd heard once. I always loved it. It was, time is much more like a valley, and at times two hills can converge.
I like that.
It's one of my favorites.
I don't think I've heard that one before.
I'm trying to remember where I think at one point somebody associated with Einstein, but I couldn't find anything that connected Einstein to that quote. But even still, I loved that quote, and it's something I always remember. And
I'm gonna look for that one.
Tim, do you want to tell the listeners where they can find you?
Oh, sure. Well, if you're interested in reading any of my books, you can find them all on Amazon.com. That's probably the best place. Just type in my name, Tim R. Swartz, and they'll all come tumbling out for your reading pleasure, both print and ebooks. You can also find some of them at your favorite local bookstore and library. And I encourage everyone to please patronize both. The local bookstores. I mean, they're becoming fewer and far between, and we need more of them. And of course your local libraries. I mean, with all the hits now that a lot of states are putting on libraries, banning books, trying to burn them. Support your local library, and support your freedom to be able to read whatever you damn well want to read.
Exactly. Here.
Yeah. And as we talked about, our most recent book is called Mimics the Others Among Us, and it's a thorough examination of the human-like entities that people have been in contact with probably since we first came out of the caves and started throwing rocks at the moon, and that can be found on Amazon as well. My website is called conspiracyjournal.com, and it's that can be kind of hard to find sometimes because the word conspiracy, naturally enough, because of all the political implications that have been put upon that term nowadays, have kind of turned people against that word. But I always like to say that no political stuff, nothing but fun things like UFOs and cryptids and ghosts. So that's conspiracyjournal.com. We like to say we've got all the weird news and information that they don't want you to know.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Tim, for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yes, Tim, it has been an absolute delight.
We may have to lure you back one of these days. 'Cause
Yes.
our topics cross each other so much.
Oh, my pleasure. I had a great time today. I hope your audience enjoyed this conversation as well. And anytime you'd like me back, don't hesitate to ask.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Little Podcast of Horrors. If you like this episode, please like, subscribe, and share. Got a true tale of the unexplained? Send us an email at littlepodcasthorrors@gmail.com or visit our website at littlepodcastofhorrors.com. If you'd like to support the podcast, join our Patreon. For $2 a month, you get access to our private Discord server where we chat, game, and you'll get access to episode extras. Don't want to commit to a monthly subscription? Make a one-time donation through Spotify or buy us a coffee. All donations keep the lights on for the show and help us fund future on-location visits to haunted places. Links are in the episode description. Want to learn witchy stuff? Take a course with Bearbridge Academy. You can also hire a witch or psychic at the Otso Salon. Be sure to use code LittlePodcast for 20% off Bearbridge courses and Otso services. Thanks for listening, my loves. Bye.